When we left you last time, pretty much everybody gets typhus and everybody's very hungry. The U.S. launches the largest humanitarian operation in American and Armenian history up until that point to kind of sort of save the First Republic from destruction. Or I guess I should say, hit the pause button on its destruction. The series is kind of like watching The Passion of the Christ. You already know how it ends, so there's really no spoiling here. Meanwhile, the Kurdish and Azeri Muslim population of the contested regions of Kars and Nakhchivan that Armenia had begun attempting to exert control over began to be flooded with Turkish weapons and officers, and this leads to the building of a revolt, is the best term to give it. There's a lot of other terms that people are using: rebellion, revolt, uprising, whatever.
Rave.
Yeah, it's a huge party in the mountains. And that's where we left you last time. Everyone knew this shit was about to blow up. It was a powder keg waiting for a single match to set the whole thing off. And it's about to explode, much like the insides of thousands of Americans after eating lettuce from Taco Bell. However, before we get there, we have to take a little side quest here. We have our first head of state change in our young Republican history. Prime Minister Kachats Nuni is kind of staying in Europe. It turns out he is much better at being a ad hoc diplomat than he is at being a prime minister.
Oh my God, they gave him a visa and he just overstayed, and now that's the reason we have to go through this painful process to get visas. Now I get it.
That's exactly why.
This is what happened.
He ends up building a lot of good relationships in the United States and the UK and France, which means he can't do both. Like, he can't be prime minister while flying back and forth, or more than likely, he's not flying, it's 1919, taking a train and a ship back and forth. It takes a very long time. He can't do both jobs. So he steps down. There's still no elections, nothing like that. Alexander Khtizian is tabbed to take his position because he was already filling it in anyway. And he would become the second of 3 prime ministers that our little republic would have before the end. We'll talk about the third and final one in the future. There's still British officers in Yerevan and places throughout Armenia, namely Kars is a huge one. This goes back to the previous battles in Kars. They have a lot of interest in the area, but the armed occupation is over. There's no British soldiers in Armenia in occupation duty. They are in Baku and Tiflis and Batumi. Nothing in Armenia.
They're mostly in places where there's oil and Tbilisi.
Yes. I mean, that is where the pipeline goes.
Well, yeah, how very expected of them. Very predictable.
I will say this trends with the future of how this episode is going to go. That's exactly right. They're strategic resources. However, in the near future, the British will pull out of what's known as Transcaucasia altogether in about 1920. And you know exactly what happens after that. So, like,
great things.
Yeah. Now, these British officers are charged with the job of supporting the creation and function of a secure Armenian state, but most importantly, the military. This is the British Empire we're talking about. It's extremely post-World War I. The idea that a standing military and security apparatus needs to be functioning for the state to exist is in the forefront of everybody's mind. And from everything that we've talked about so far, you can kind of see why. Right?
Well, yeah, you generally kind of can't see why.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to run a state if everybody is dying. For example, the regions outside of Yerevan had deteriorated to the point of total and complete lawlessness once again. This is mostly due to the aftermath of the famine and the horrible winter that we talked about in our last episode, but also because of all of the Kurdish, Turkish, and Azeri partisans is the term that we'll use, becoming roving gangs of murderers and bandits.
Okay, I was going to make a joke that if you ask the locals, they're going to say the reason is immigration. And you just said like, it was because of the Azeris and Kurds and others. So
Armenians trying so hard to be European.
We can possibly do this lawlessness, not us.
Armenians desperately trying to be European by blaming immigrants.
We're the originators, okay? Thank you very much.
Since weapons confiscation missions had been suspended, which we talked about in our last episode, these bands of partisans, which is, again, a term that I'm going to settle on because it's the easiest way to describe them, had only been getting better and better armed thanks to the open pipeline of supplies from Turkey and Azerbaijan, to the point that when Armenian military patrols did go into areas which they thought they controlled and could go into, they often found themselves outgunned and outnumbered by the partisans that they ran in. Colonel John Plowden, the British advisor to Yerevan, ended up agreeing with Commander Droe, of all people, coming to the conclusion that the military had no choice but to move in and secure these places that had shifted from outside of state control. And that does make sense, right? There's no massive uprising yet. These are just places that are drifting out of what little amount of state control that Armenia had. The idea was, yeah, it's not going to look great. The Muslim population is not going to like it. But if they don't go in, violence is going to continue to spiral out of control no matter what. Like, they have to go in regardless of the consequences.
Yeah, we have to, I think, factor in one more thing here, right? So they got the guns, they got the whatever versions of weapons were given to them. But I assume when it comes to like food supply and other things, those are more scarce.
Well, depends. The pipeline from Turkey, most importantly coming from Turkey, is giving them everything.
Oh, okay.
These villagers they're still struggling. They're still in the immediate aftermath of an outright famine, but they're not as bad off as you'd think. And just so people know what kind of weapons I'm talking about here, this isn't like hunting rifles and stuff. It is machine guns. It is, of course, tens of thousands of rifles, World War I surplus, artillery, mortars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
It's an army. They've given them an army.
God damn it, they're gonna steal all the doors.
There's no doors left. Everybody just has like a rug covering the door. However, the green light of any operation to go in there wasn't up to Plowden. It was up to his boss in Tiflis, General George Corey. And Corey understood that allowing the Armenian frontier to turn to a war zone was not a good idea. And he did believe that sending in the Armenian military was probably the best choice. But he did have a legitimate reason as to why he didn't want to allow the Armenian army to be let off the leash, so to speak. For one, the previous attempts to disarm Muslim villages did not go great. They led to outright abuse, which in turn spurred more Muslims to join the partisans, and a propaganda victory for the Turks and the Azeris, who were then using that to motivate more people into the partisan ranks to sow discord in Armenia. And a lot of these quote-unquote partisans were just people from Turkey and Azerbaijan. More on that in a little bit. There was also doubt that the Armenian military, which was horribly undermanned, underarmed, and overworked, that they could even do it. Remember, every single bit of law, order, and security within the First Republic is falling on the army. Mm-hmm. There's no cops. There's no intelligence services. You effectively have the National Assembly, the Prime Minister, and then the army. Those are the only things in the government that are functioning.
And the Ministry of Enlightenment.
And the Ministry of Enlightenment, which still has not built a single school. And you might be wondering, how are they underarmed? The British are there. They have military advisors there. Aren't they supplying them? No,
Okay.
They're not. They have explicitly decided not to supply the Armenians with munitions. Now, the reason for this, there's a few. One is the fear that if they dumped World War I surplus into the hands of the Armenians, they would immediately use it to go to war against Azerbaijan or Turkey. This isn't just the British that are saying this. There are multiple people within the Armenian government who have said this out loud, that this is immediately what we would use it for.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense. That should be expected. But yet again, perhaps if you want the Armenian military to exert control over those areas, they would need some guns, they would need some weapons.
I hate to come out sounding like I support where the British are coming from here, because I don't, and that will get more obvious as this episode goes on. But Droe is now the Deputy Minister of Defense. And he is the one saying, like, if you give us weapons, we're definitely invading Turkey.
The guy never cared about, like, authority. So,
right. Which is a problem because they promoted him.
Well, yeah.
So, like, and the British, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Like, they respect him as a soldier, but they also understood as a politician, he's fucking insane.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise, Droe ends up being a Nazi in a couple decades. But like, and that will become more obvious as we go on as well. So like the Brits really want to help as much as their government will allow. Now, the British military is like, give them everything they need. Let's party. But the British government is very worried about what would happen.
Yeah.
And most importantly, again, remember, it's only like a year after World War I ended.
Yeah.
The British know that if they dump weapons in Armenia and Armenia does go to war against Turkey, which is in the middle of its own civil war, it could drag the Brits into it. So they're like, let's just not.
So they won't take a year off or something?
I mean, I think the whole world probably should have, but, they didn't.